Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Council, Norman Utilities Authority, Norman Municipal Authority, and Norman Tax Increment Finance Authority special meeting of June 10th, 2025. Madam Clerk, will you please call a roll?
Councilmember Ball. Councilmember Peacock.
Here.
Councilmember Montoya.
Present.
Councilmember Grant.
Present.
Councilmember Nash.
Here.
Councilmember Hinkle.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Dixon.
Present.
Mayor Hackala.
I am here. Thank you. First item is the consideration of adoption, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of the FYE 2026 City of Norman proposed operating and capital budgets and the Norman Convention and Visitors Bureau Incorporated FYE 2026 budget with detailed annual plan of work. I need a motion to approve or reject the FYE 2026 operating and capital budgets and the Norman Convention and Visitors Bureau FYE 2026 budget and detailed annual plan of work.
Motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. We will consider the amendments one at a time. I'll recognize Councilmember first amendment.
I move that grammatical and typographical corrections to the budget documents with no financial impact be made as necessary.
A motion and second. Any discussion on the amendment? You ready?
Where's she at? I don't see her. Mayumi, are you out there and I just can't see you?
Do not see her.
Okay. Moving on. That's it.
Let's vote.
Oh, sorry.
Council members, you may cast your vote.
All votes have been cast and the motion to amend passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. I recognize Councilmember Montoya for the next amendment.
I move that city council allocations to the general fund be increased by $25,000 for social and voluntary services contributions.
Motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for the amendment?
Cynthia Rogers. Okay.
Any comments from council regarding this amendment?
Passed and the amendment passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Recognize Councilmember Peacock for the next amendment.
Thank you. I move that Parks and Recreation allocations in the general fund be increased by $11,200 for contributions to the Historical Museum and the Performing Arts Studio / Depot.
Second.
I have a motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for this amendment?
Cynthia.
Cynthia Rogers, Ward 4. I appreciate this amendment. I think a strong community is one that embraces the arts and the historic house. So it's not a lot of money, but I guess it's a little more than you'd plan. Thank you.
Okay. Motion on the floor is to increase Parks and Recreation's allowances or allocations in the general fund by $11,200 for contributions to the Historic Museum and the Performing Arts Studio Depot. Council members, you may cast your vote.
All votes have been cast and the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Recognize Councilmember Grant for the next amendment.
I move that sanitation fund allocations be increased by $200,000 to the fund solar arrays at the transfer station.
Second.
Have a motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for this amendment?
No.
All right. Any comments from council regarding this amendment? Motion on the floor is to increase the sanitation fund allowances by $200,000 to fund solar arrays at the transfer station. Council members, you may cast your votes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Recognize Councilmember Nash for the next amendment.
I move that water fund allocations be increased by $125,000 and water reclamation fund allocations be increased by $125,000 to fund solar arrays at the line maintenance facility.
Second.
Motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for this amendment?
No.
All right. Any comments from council regarding this amendment? Thank you. The motion on the floor is to increase the water fund allocations by $125,000 and water reclamation fund allocations by $125,000 to fund solar arrays at the line maintenance facility. Council members, you may cast your vote.
Cast, and the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Recognize Councilmember Hinkle for the next amendment.
I move that water reclamation fund allocations be increased by $3,800,000 to fund renovations to the water reclamation, administrative, and storage buildings.
Have a motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for this amendment?
We do. Cynthia? Okay, never mind.
Any comments from council regarding this amendment? Hearing none. Motion on the floor is to increase water reclamation fund allocations by $3,800,000 to fund renovations to the water reclamation, administrative, and storage buildings. Council member, you may cast your vote.
The votes have been cast, and the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. I recognize Councilmember Dixon for the next amendment.
I move the Community Development Block Grant Fund revenue and appropriations be increased by $90,849.55 to reflect the updated FYE 2026 award amount from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Second.
Have a motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for this amendment to speak?
No.
Okay. Are there any comments from council regarding this amendment? None. Motion on the floor is to increase Community Development Block Grant Fund revenue and appropriations by $90,849.55 to reflect the updated FYE 2026 award amount from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Council members, you may cast your vote.
All votes have been cast, and the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. I recognize Councilmember Holman for the next amendment.
Thank you. I move that transit and parking fund allocations be increased by $665,000 to fund on-demand transit services. I further move that transit and parking fund revenues be increased by $131,477 for the University of Oklahoma's portion of the on-demand transit services and $24,990 for an increase in Federal Transit Authority grant revenue.
Second.
Have a motion and second. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone signed up for this amendment? The motion on the floor is, yes, sir.
Just because the number amount is pretty large, and I think we've had some questions about transit funding, I did want to ask if Taylor could come up and maybe just summarize transit funding in Norman and how we operate the transit system and where the funding comes from.
Thank you, Councilmember Holman and Mayor and rest of the council. So our transit funding, our transit program largely consists of our fixed route bus system, Embark Norman, and the paratransit system, Embark Norman Plus, which, as you all know, we contract with Embark to provide the operations. That's the largest chunk of our budget. You'll see in a couple weeks a proposed agenda item for that with a contract with Embark to continue that relationship. So that's about, I'm just going to use rough numbers, about $4.6 million projected to be next year. And then we have some administrative costs on our side, some capital costs. All in all, the budget with Norman On Demand and the fixed route and paratransit side is about $6 million, I believe. So the $665,000 to fund on-demand transit services. Well, I'll go back to the funding side of things too. We get about $2.9 million from FTA grants. That's just an annual allocation that's divvied up by formula from the federal level to every municipality or every agency that operates transit. And And then we get about another half of our funding from our sales tax, our one-eighth of a cent sales tax that was passed by Norman voters in November 2019. And then we get 200 and a little over 200,000 from the state. There's a public transit revolving fund that they, again, divvy up by formula to the transit agencies in the state, and then a little bit of advertising revenue. So the total amount here is $665,000. We did have a little bit of money in our FY26 budget for the operations side, about $48,000 more than what was needed for Embark. So the total contract amount with this provider, if approved and goes to council and is approved, would be about $691,000. But you're seeing an amendment for $665,000 to increase that total amount. And then, as you can see there, the expenses are offset by about $131,000 contribution from OU to include their Safe Ride program, which we started this program a couple years ago with that partnership. That's an increase of about $10,000 over this year's contribution. And about 19% of the total budget, 19 to 20% of the total budget is that $131,000. And then the last thing on this amendment, we did get a little bit of extra money from the Federal Transit Administration grant, and that's what's reflected there. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I'm happy to take any more.
Yeah, yeah, very, very good. I appreciate that. So ridership has continued to increase for both fixed route and on demand. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So as we report a CP&T every month, our ridership has increased month over month and year over year. With the last month through April, we showed about 420,000 riders on our fixed route and paratransit system versus 330,000 riders from previous fiscal year. And then on Norman On Demand, we have had 42,000 riders this fiscal year, and that's through May because those numbers are a little bit quicker to update. And that's versus about 25,000 riders last year. But we're talking first year of the program versus second year of the program. So first year takes a little bit to get going, people to find out about it. And we feel like this program really hit its stride the second year as more people found out about it and started to use it. So,
Okay. And currently, the transit fund is not needing a general fund subsidy. Is that correct?
that's correct. We're pretty close as we've been discussing, but as of right now, we're projected not to have a general fund subsidy.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Any other questions for Taylor? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
The motion on the floor is to increase transit and parking fund allocations by $665,000 to fund on-demand transit services, transit parking fund revenues by $131,477 for the University of Oklahoma's portion on the on-demand system, and $24,990 in Federal Transit Authority grant revenue. Council members, you may cast your vote.
All votes have been cast, and the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, this is opportunity for members of the public to make comments regarding the budget as amended. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up?
Cynthia?
Cynthia Rogers, still Ward 4. I jotted down a few questions that I had that I hope we can get clarified for all the people that looked at the 529-page report, which I most appreciate because you can figure out what's going on. So I noticed that the sanitation fund revenue was down, and I didn't understand why that was the case. So it looked like up until now, we've had excess revenue over costs. So I don't know if that's something that changed, something going forward. I was also curious about the interfund transfers. It went from 17.6 million last year to 7.3 million. And I didn't have enough time to tease out what that was. But I think that's a question worth answering. Finally, I noticed that the risk management, mostly for health insurance claim, jumped up a lot by 8 million. I was wondering if we had a plan for how to control costs there. I know OU sometimes does healthy living and all sorts of things to try to control health insurance claim costs. Yep, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Excuse me, Mayumi?
Hello, Mayumi Windler, Ward 2. I'm concerned about the projections on sales taxes. That's going to really impact the budget. And I'm just kind of worried that, well, since we're no longer collecting grocery sales tax, how much does that affect things? And yeah, that's really it. I'm concerned about, the income to the city and what happens when the sales tax is a lot less than what is projected. I mean, I know we have like the emergency funds, rainy day funds, all that kind of stuff, but what if those get exhausted? What happens then? That's it.
That's all? Do you want to answer any of those questions?
Happy to. If Mr. Francisco can touch base on those interfund transfers, I'm sure he has them right on the top of his mind.
Director of Finance, and I will try to address some of the questions that came up. As relates to the health insurance increase, that is just reflective of our claim costs. We are doing everything that we can to contain those costs, but healthcare costs in general are just going up at a very rapid rate. The number of claims has not really gone up that much, but the cost of those claims, particularly for prescription drugs, is just inflating rapidly. As relates to the sanitation fund, I'll ask Chris if he might address that. Related to the sales tax projections, again, that is just reflective of our projections related to the economy in general. We actually experienced a decline in this fiscal year. From last fiscal year, we've been very flat over the last 4 fiscal years. Again, just reflective of what we believe to be going on in the economy. We think the local economy and really the state and national economy are really slowing down. And folks are just kind of pulling in on their expenditures, which is reflecting negatively on our sales tax revenue, and that is just reflected in the projections.
And just a quick note, Mr. Francisco, the grocery sales tax reduction that we all read about was only the state's portion of the sales tax charged at the point of sale for many grocery items, but not everything you'd buy in the grocery store. So the city's portion of sales tax at everything in the grocery store remained unchanged.
That's correct.
Chris, on solid waste?
Chris Mattingly, Utilities Director. On the solid waste, it's a balancing act. We were seeing an increase of outside loads of trash being brought to Norman from Shawnee, Edmond, because of our prices were so low. So what we did is we raised our prices at the transfer station to match the I-240 prices to try to drive off some of the quantity because it was overloading our facility. And it's a balancing act, so we got them, we matched theirs, and we've seen a reduction in the tons coming to our transfer station.
Councilmember?
Chris, I did have, just real quick. We talked about it in the previous budget hearing, but the last sanitation rate increase was
2011?
2011.
Yes.
A pretty long time.
I give my hat off to Brett Scoville, ran a good ship there.
Okay.
Really put us in a solid position.
But it's something that we're going to be having to think about as
Exactly.
a community.
One day we'll run out of that.
and the fact that it does require a vote of the people to increase it, but it has been 14 years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then, Anthony, I did just, if you don't mind, wanted to, if you might touch a little bit on some of the complications, though, that we've had with the grocery tax being collected locally, and confusion that may have existed where some businesses may not have been collecting it, things like that. And then also how, our sales tax revenue now compared to 2019, 5 years ago, is significantly higher than it was then. So we haven't really seen like a decrease in revenue, but we've seen a really significant increase in costs in most everything. So maybe just to summarize some of that, if you would, for the public.
Yes. First, the grocery sales tax statutes that changed a couple of years ago were only at the state level. But we were concerned that some individual retailers in their collection of the sales tax might actually roll back their local collection of sales taxes. And so we continued to monitor that. And we did have some bugs, if you will, where that was the actual experience in some cases. Through the State Tax Commission and through our local efforts, we do believe that most retailers are collecting sales taxes at the local level as they should now. This is a delicate subject. Repeat your question. I don't want to expand on it.
Part about revenue? Yeah, just that revenue today compared to our budget in 2019, pre-COVID, if you will.
Yeah, so
it's pretty significantly higher than it.
We have discussed this in previous budget years and with the Finance Committee on an ongoing basis. But coming out of the COVID decline in sales tax collections during the inflationary period of our fiscal year 2021, we had a substantial increase in our sales tax collections. And the euphemism that I have talked to the Finance Committee about is that as it relates to sales tax, inflation is good. And during the hyperinflation of calendar year 2021, which is our fiscal year ending in 2021, we experienced an actual increase of almost 20% year over year. And we have stayed at that high level. So when I say that we are flat or that we have experienced a small decline, it is a flat or a small decline from a historically high level. So our dollar revenues continue to be historically high, but our rate of expenditures is kind of drawing that down. So it is correct to say that our sales tax revenues continue to be at a historically high level compared to where they were in 2019, pre-COVID. But it is also clear to say that we are spending down those revenues at a historically high rate.
And the biggest expense for the city is city personnel,
Salaries and
staff,
rev-
salaries and benefits.
Yes.
Okay, and then I think with sales tax, so for me personally, I wish that we didn't have to charge sales tax on groceries and many other essential items that people need. But we are sales tax based, and as we've talked about many times over the years, we're the only state in the country that cities have to operate on sales tax revenue. So the state has seen a revenue decline because of their elimination of the grocery tax. Because some people have said, well, now cities should do it, or cities have been concerned that now we'll be pressured to do it to try to repeal grocery taxes locally. In Norman, just off the top of your head, what would be the budget impact if that were to happen?
We estimate that if groceries were exempted at the local level, we would have an experience of a 20 to 25% reduction in our sales tax revenue. That's kind of an anecdotal, but we know what the major retailers are collecting grocery sales tax right now. And it would be devastating for our ability to operate because, as you say, Norman, Oklahoma cities in general, we are the only state in the United States that do not collect property tax for municipal operations. So we are more wholly dependent on sales tax in Oklahoma than in any other state. We can ill afford to give up grocery sales taxes in any city in Oklahoma. The state of Oklahoma's sales tax revenue year over year has declined about 13% because of that dependence on groceries at the state level. And we are even more dependent than they are on grocery sales tax.
Okay, thank you, Anthony, appreciate it.
And Councilmember Holman, as it relates to the last question from our community members, what would happen or what happens if revenue continues on its current trajectory and expenditures continue on their current trajectory? We recognize it is a statutory obligation to deliver a balanced budget, and we spend an awful lot of time with professional eyes monitoring all of our revenue sources and our expenditures. What it translates to just quite literally is the reduction of the level of service we are currently providing. And the City Council provides the priority to which those dollars would be allocated in the event our expenditures and our revenues cross paths the wrong way. So it would be general fund expenditures, and you would be able to go department by department and service by service to determine what services we would provide with the sales tax revenue available.
One other thing I would point out is remember that not only the general fund, but we have these dedicated sales taxes. Public transit would be devastated. Public safety, because there's a dedicated public safety sales tax, would be devastated. Our capital fund would be very much devastated by a reduction of the grocery sales tax. We are even more dependent on sales tax than most cities because we have these dedicated sales taxes. Norman Forward would be devastated.
Okay, so everybody needs to spend your money in Norman, live in Norman, and encourage your friends to spend their money if they don't live in Norman. Thank you, Anthony.
All right. Thank you all. Councilmember?
I also wanted to ask Anthony Francisco a couple questions.
Don't get too comfortable.
To speak to constituent concerns about the future, the next council can decide in its summer priority list to do things to ensure that the general fund is healthy. What areas would you recommend council look at for reductions or efficiency?
I would defer to council in setting those priorities, but again, I would follow just kind of you have the pie chart in your budget document that shows the major areas of expenditure. So I would suggest that the major areas of reduction would follow those major areas of expenditure. And so, I'm pointing at public works, I'm pointing at police and fire, those major areas of expenditure, but also major areas of service delivery. So we cannot reduce expenditures without those expenditure reductions being felt in service delivery. And so council would just have to consider and prioritize those services that they would most hold dear.
If you were a layperson looking through our budget book, how would you find out what the city's overtime looks like?
The overtime budgets are in the budget document, part of the salary and benefit category of expenditure. If you wanted to look at overtime particularly, you would need to get to the line item level of expenditure, which is in the monthly reports that we give, what we call the revenue expenditure report or the yellow book. But again, that's public information. If anyone asks, we would show them what the overtime budgets are by division or by department or at the general fund or sanitation fund level.
Okay.
And Councilmember Grant, as it relates to our ability to assist council, should we get to that moment in maybe the most appropriate places to consider budget reductions going forward, our most immediate control valve in this whole operation has to do with the speed at which we backfill vacant positions. So we can impact the budget positively as we slow down the rehiring process. And what we recognize is, pick a service, for example, if somebody in parks maintenance retired and we were slowing down the rehire of that parks maintenance employee, we could see a point where the parks aren't getting mowed every 7 days, they're gonna get mowed every 9 days. And that's what it may look like initially. It may take a little longer to fill in potholes as there are fewer and fewer individuals available to provide each one of those services. So you would probably see it and feel it across the board just in our initial actions in slowing down the hiring process to hang on to as much of those budgeted resource dollars as possible. But that would just kind of be the first glance, and then we really do get into priorities. What is the most basic level of service council believes they are required to provide, and work our way down that list.
All right, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Anything else from Mr. Francisco before he goes back to his chair? He's even smarter. All right. Anything else, any other from council? Okay. The motion on the floor is to approve the 2026 operating and capital budgets as amended in the Norman Convention and Visitors Bureau FYE 2026 budget and detailed annual plan of work. Council members, you may cast your votes.
All votes have been cast, and the motion to approve the budget as amended passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Francisco. And, wonderful job. All right.
If I may,
Please.
members, I would be remiss if I did not recognize the work of Kim Kaufman, our budget manager. As many of you know, right in the middle of budget season, I had a major illness, and I was in the hospital for pretty much the whole month of April. And she presented the budget, she prepared the budget, and she deserves the credit for everything that is before you today. So just thank you.
Thank you. Well, council, we are adjourned.